Hello and welcome to Thinkpod, powered by the FII Institute. I'm your host, Mark Barton, and for over 2 decades, I've been at the forefront of global conversations on the issues that matter the most. In this series, I'll be meeting the leaders who are rising to tackle the grand challenges that face humanity right now. Together, we'll be discussing the radical ideas and the transformative solutions that'll benefit both people and planet. This episode, I'm joined by Dario Giuliani, founder and director of Briter Bridges, a leading intelligence platform mapping the investment landscape in Africa and beyond. We uncover the smart cities that are transforming the lives of people in urban poverty, a global food system on the brink of collapse, and a tech ecosystem in Africa that shows no slowing. Dario, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Mark.
Let's start at the beginning. What is an underserved market? So we understand concepts. What's an underserved market?
So when Briter started, we were trying to find a terminology that would include organizations and countries and economies that wouldn't necessarily be subject to the GDP growth or the human development capital, but could be looking at the different indicators that concur to making a country known and serviced outside of the national services or not. And so we looked at developing economies, emerging markets, and we didn't really want to abide by the standard and conventional terminology. We wanted to craft our own sort of lingo, and we looked at.
Is this your lingo?
No, I mean it came. It's now become.
It was out there, but
right. It's now become.
You've made it your own.
Yeah, I think we wanted to really focus on why are these countries not serviced or recognized for what they can offer to the outside world. So to the investors, to the other entrepreneurs, to other governments. And so we really focus on the word served, right?
Yes.
Because they're underserved. They are not known out there as they should be.
Is there a number of underserved markets? I mean, in your data, do you have a figure out of all the countries in the world?
Yeah, no, I think they largely coincide with the so-called emerging economies.
Right.
The world is starting now to recognize the potential that they have, the fact that there's no just predominantly poverty or, as I said, the underserved communities, but there's also a lot of potential. And in fact, the word Briter, like the actual name of Briter, the company, was born to showcase the brighter side of these underserved markets.
How have these underserved markets fared during COVID? You must have the data.
I think we need to look at what Briter does and what the work that someone like the World Bank is doing on this market.
Yes.
So there has been huge damage done by COVID, and now we're seeing kind of the post-COVID era where we're seeing the market crashing, a lot of inflation coming up, not just in these markets. But insofar as our work at Briter goes, we have been focusing on the entrepreneurial space, the venture space. And I've been discussing a lot with investors recently about what they thought the factors increasing the levels of VC in this market has been. And everyone seems to sort of agree on the fact that due diligence and access to entrepreneurs via Zoom has actually played out as one of the factors that has increased the access by, say, American investors or British investors or French investors to entrepreneurs that, before they would have had to fly in and meet in person. But with the normalization of kind of remote work and remote interaction, so did the interactions with this world.
So it wouldn't have happened, if COVID hadn't have happened, you wouldn't have had that influx of US and overseas investors?
I think the process would have been different because it would have been subject to actually physical presence on the continent. And I mean, our data show that many of the, especially growth stage investors and private equity funds that invest in Africa are not actually present on the continent. And there's a so-called funds that are not committed to the continent, which still represent a very large proportion of the funding that goes into the continent. And other continents or subcontinent like India and Southeast Asia and Latin America. So for some counterintuitive reason, the presence of COVID and the boom of remote interactions has actually played a role. I don't want to say it's
An
the only
unintended
role.
consequence.
An unintended consequence
Yeah.
that played out well for the entrepreneurs, even though the amount of funding in this continent, especially in Africa, remains vastly below the numbers that you see in China.
How do local funds fit in?
What's happening right now is there is a lot of money coming into the continent through development finance and impact funds and foundations and government. So what's happening is seems to be a shift from, like a paradigm shift from the money gone into the NGOs for the past decades, all the way into money going into entrepreneurship through venture capital. And what you see in Africa is that a lot of funds are still funded by public LPs, or like development finance and governments. So while you see maybe American commercial investor retrenching, we are noticing a lot of work being done at the level of development finance. For instance, new funds being set up, new capital being allocated to the continent through local funds.
You recently launched Africa's Rising 100 2021.
Yeah.
What it does is it showcases 100 of the most funded companies at the end of each year across Africa. Brilliant. So who are the stars?
We've seen a large proportion of funding going into financial technology. Everyone seems to be asking, why is financial technology being funded? Right, fintech. So fintech represents the underlying element that then is able to kind of enables complementary industries to thrive, right? So e-commerce wouldn't be there without online payments, right? E-health or like e-agriculture wouldn't be there without the ability to transact and connect remotely. And because the fundamental kind of underlying component of any commercial transaction is the exchange of money, financial technology is that means that allows you, to transact. And this has been, I guess, the first phase in many ecosystems that we've seen across the world as in terms of industry that has come up as the first winner. But then what we've seen is a huge increase in commerce and B2B commerce. There have been a lot of deals above kind of $50 or $100 million in the last few years. Jumia was very famous a few years ago, but now we've seen a whole new generation of organizations that are actually supplying the merchants, supplying informal merchants and formal merchants, or allowing, the big names such as DHL or Unilever or any other large retailer or large FMCG to enter the market and address the local distributors who then address the local markets. And we've seen a lot of this, but this has only come after the big boom in fintech. I would say probably B2B commerce and e-commerce are the second generation of industries that are being funded.
I want to move, Dario, onto food, which is clearly super relevant right now, given the increase we're seeing across the world in all sorts of food prices. And you've released a report with the United Nations World Food Programme, and you released the Innovating Food Systems in East Africa report. Tell us about this report, which I know focuses on the food systems ecosystem, encompassing innovation, digital and technology solutions in various East African locations.
Yeah, so one of the types of work that we've been doing at Briter is trying to make sense of the industries, not just looking at specific verticals and just analyzing those. So when we actually approached the World Food Programme, we wanted to highlight the complexity and diversity that concur to building the food system, especially because, Briter has this technology and innovation angle that we focus on. But we looked at not simply the technology in the agricultural space, but we also looked at the technology that allows farmers to connect with markets or insurers to connect with farmers and insure crops and avoid or at least mitigate post-harvest losses, all the way to sort of moonshots such as blockchain utilized to prevent counterfeiting or to allow a better supply chain or a more secure supply chain. And we created this umbrella term such as like the innovation for food system. And we looked at all of this. Again, This is an example of how public money is now looking into more sustainable models as opposed to kind of one-off projects and NGOs. And we are seeing the UN and UN agencies, or like the World Bank or other government agency, development finance institution, entering the entrepreneurial space, trying to kind of foster innovation from the ground up through public money and ensure kind of longevity of really the industries that then develop as these entrepreneurs succeed.
And the innovation that's coming out of East Africa, is it enough to withstand what we're seeing and what might be coming down the road?
So this is actually a point that I always try to stress. Innovation in Africa is an enabler.
Yeah.
But the supply or the production capacity of technology-enabled solutions is vastly under what their demand is, especially for food, to meet food security, right? As a matter of fact, East Africa has been subject to a lot of problems, a lot of kind of natural disasters in the past few years. So I wouldn't necessarily say that technology is the solutions to hunger or to food insecurity, especially as the region is quite I wouldn't say the region is unstable, but there are pockets of the region that are still unstable. Yeah. So there's still a lot of work to do, let's put it like that. And small dynamic players in 2022 often coincide with technology-enabled or digital-enabled solutions and entrepreneurs have the potential to access the bottom of the pyramid. When we're talking about agriculture in Africa, we're talking about smallholding farmers.
Yes.
And we're talking about informal sector. So these are often off the radar of the, I don't want to say institution, but let's say the large corporate and the large distributor of kind of any food-related product worldwide. So the fact that these dynamic entrepreneurs and these younger entrepreneurs are able to tap into these demographic groups is very important, and support to these entrepreneurs is key. This said, this cannot operate in silos. Entrepreneurs or digital entrepreneurs by themselves are not able to solve hunger in Africa, and they're not able to solve, Africa has hundreds of millions of farmers. Maybe hundreds of millions, I'm pushing the number, but we're talking large numbers of scattered farmers, a community across the continent. And so it would be a bit too pushy to pretend that entrepreneurs can meet this demand, but can definitely work as an enabler for other organizations to tap into these demographic groups.
You've also released a report towards more livable cities in Africa, which examines innovation for inclusion and sustainability in urban areas. How would you define livability?
So livability is another term where we just play crafty terminology. Briter was born with the idea of showcasing the brighter side. But the idea to showcase the brighter side is founded upon the idea that more and better information can unlock more opportunities, and more opportunities can unlock better socioeconomic development. Okay, this is the underlying equation behind everything that we do. So when we looked at livability as an organization that largely looks at tech and innovation and digital and green disruption, let's say, we wanted to focus on what else isn't said to the public about innovation. What is that innovation cannot meet, and is innovation a placebo or an actual solution to some of the problems on the continent, especially in Africa. So the idea of livability wanted to bring together inclusiveness, and the idea of sustainability. So the ability to perpetuate inclusive standards, especially in urban areas, in the longer term, right? So what we looked at was the role that entrepreneurship can play to promote inclusion on the continent, the level of urban areas. There's a very high urbanization rate on the continent as in other emerging markets. On the continent, I mean Africa and other emerging markets. In fact, everyone knows that the number of people living in urban areas across emerging markets are likely to be vastly predominant in the next few decades.
The UN estimates that presently there are about 4.4 billion people, about half the world's population, living in urban areas.
Right.
And in 2050, the global urban population would increase by 52% to 6.7 billion.
Yeah.
And the informal economy employs about 60% of Africa's urban population.
Yeah, and
Wow.
most of this is coming from developing countries.
Yeah.
Because the fertility rate in countries like England or Italy or Japan is the population is almost decreasing, right? Whereas there's still a very high fertility rate, and as the health condition and life condition in Africa or Asia, Latin America rise, and with access to vaccines and better healthcare, better food, and better standards, more livable cities, right? The large population is likely to come from this.
Where do smart cities fit into this? Kigali, Konza, the administrative capital for urban development in Egypt. Are these models for urban areas, across entire emerging economies, not just Africa?
I think the underlying motive behind all of this research is, yes, it's great, but there's something that needs to be discussed further.
Yeah.
As much as entrepreneurs are not the only solutions, smart cities are a fantastic model that can be used to think of the development of urban areas. These are not the only ways that urban areas can be developed in a sustainable way, especially in an inclusive way, because as you know, we cannot expect half of the population, especially living in informal settlement.
How do smart cities benefit everyone? I mean, that's
right. Especially because like smart cities, Konza is sitting about 50 or 60 kilometers from Nairobi, right? So you have New Cairo and you have the new administration that are being built fairly closer to the city, as far as I understand. Many of the innovation cities that are around these cities, especially in Africa, are set close to the capital city or the economic capital of the country. Like Lagos, in Lagos, there's an island that is being built out of the coast. It's called Atlantic City. Atlantic City.
Not that one.
It's called Eco-Atlantic.
Yeah.
Eco-Atlantic.
Close.
Yeah. Very close. And that stands as a kind of supplement to the city of Lagos. But this is not the standard everywhere, and this cannot become the standard. People cannot take it for granted that these cities will become the substitute for this. However, because the urbanization in emerging markets has likely come over the past 40 years, there's still a lot of work that can be done at a level of restructuring and modernize the way these cities are being built. Because you look at London, you look at Paris, Milan, these cities have been built in centuries, right? There's a lot of room for expansion in the city in a way that is inclusive, sustainable, safe, all across these emerging markets.
The essence of Briter is collecting, curating, visualizing information about businesses and investment across, as we've said, underserved markets. So what are the challenges of collecting effective data?
I would say accessibility.
Yeah.
I would say confidentiality, trust. Briter, I think we've become what we've become on the continent because we've given a lot over the past 4 years. We've produced a lot of free content, so we have thousands of students that are accessing us, thousands of entrepreneurs that don't have the means to pay for a service. Actually, before we even went out and asked for money and monetize everything. So accessibility is, I think, a function of market trust, a function of market, I would say, fame or recognition of the work that you're doing. And then confidentiality still remains a problem all across the market intelligence industry worldwide. Because unless or until you as a company build a name and build trust within your audience, you're not going to be able to find or get access to information that is new, primary information, right? At Briter, we collect a lot of primary information from the ecosystem, and we try to monitor the trends in the market. Like right now, we just published something on the market slowdown and how the presence of US investors as a large proportion of funding could actually be a problematic for the continent, because these are maybe fleeing the continent for the time being until things get better.
Okay.
So we try to monitor the space and then get out there and consult the ecosystem and try to get information from them.
And how can we use that data? How do you use that data to measure ESG and social impact?
So while I wouldn't say that Briter is primarily a ESG data provider, we do work with a lot of foundation impact funds and governments, but I always say anyone who's doing research, investment or business in underserved markets has the need to access information. And this is what the first layer that we provide. I always say that Briter works a bit as a filter to the performances of the ecosystem, meaning if we get 1, the ecosystem is likely to get 9. Because let's say there's a government who's setting up a fund and wants to know more about a market. The fund is likely to be 10 million. Say 1 million goes to us, and then 9 million goes to the ecosystem. Or like 10,000 come to us, and then the vast majority goes to the ecosystem in the form of funding, in the form of investment.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Briter was born to showcase this brighter presence in the world that are underserved markets. So the legacy would want to be the shift from underserved to rightfully served.
Yeah.
We're only 3.5, right? So it's gonna take a bit. We can only do so much, right? We do the reporting, but then the people that come in the game and start putting money or start really taking stakes in these regions by investing in companies or promoting government activities, then it's on them. We can only advise.
Yeah. Dario, thank you so much. It's been
Thanks,
fascinating. In these turbulent times, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to ThinkPod for more insight and analysis.